At 6 a.m., HOA President Linda Parker blocked my driveway, screaming that she'd seize my property by force if I didn't comply. The smell of her cheap perfume mixed with desperation filled the morning air, but I couldn't help grinning. I had found the document last night that would end her tyranny. For 18 months, Linda had tormented me with fake citations, phony surveyors, and false government complaints, all because I bought a farmhouse 50 feet outside her HOA's boundary. My name's Ethan Reyes, a 45-year-old electrician who thought escaping apartment chaos meant freedom, but instead I'd walk straight into a suburban war zone. After my divorce, I wanted peace, a place to park my work truck without anyone complaining. When I found this 1940s farmhouse on Meadow Ridge Road, 2 acres for a steal, I thought I'd hit paradise. County maps confirmed I was outside the HOA, free at last. That illusion shattered the day a white Lexus rolled into my driveway. Out stepped Linda Parker, a perfectly dressed suburban queen with a predator's smile, holding a basket of soaps and a thick envelope of HOA covenants. She told me Mrs. Green, the previous owner, had agreed informally to follow their community rules for harmony, so I'd need to repaint my home beige, hide my work truck, and cancel my vegetable garden because it didn't match approved aesthetics. I pointed to the property line 50 feet away, saying, "I'm not in your HOA." Her smile froze before she whispered, "There are always creative ways to handle noncompliance, Mr. Reyes." That phrase made my instincts buzz. I called the county to double-check. Confirmed again, I was completely outside their jurisdiction. Still uneasy, I contacted Mrs. Green's daughter, Clara, who nearly shouted, "Did that woman show up yet?" Clara revealed how Linda had made her mother's final years miserable with fake violations, intimidation visits, and harassment. She warned me that Linda had a financial problem and needed to expand the HOA to survive. That night, I ordered security cameras because something told me this woman wasn't done. The next morning, I heard the crunch of tires, Linda's car slowly rolling by, her phone out, taking pictures of my home like a detective building a case. I almost pitied my neighbors living under her reign. It must have felt like prison under a smiling warden. But what I didn't know then was that Linda wasn't just controlling, she was desperate. And desperate people with power are the most dangerous. 2 weeks later, I woke to a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. Violation, unauthorized exterior modifications. It looked government-issued, official seal, fancy letterhead, but the so-called offense? Fixing my broken shutters. The next day, another notice. Commercial vehicle violation for parking my truck in my own driveway. Then, landscaping noncompliance because I hadn't mowed in 4 days. My years as an electrician told me the wiring didn't match the blueprint. Something was fake. So I called the actual city code office. They said, "We haven't issued any citations on Meadow Ridge Road." The seal was clip art. The department didn't even exist. Linda Parker had fabricated an entire fake government agency to bully me. Impersonating officials is a serious crime, but that didn't slow her down. That afternoon, she returned with another coordinator, a woman in a business suit measuring my hedges with a tape, lecturing about 3-inch height violations. I told them both to leave before I called the real police. Linda smiled thinly and said, "It'd be a shame if your business reputation suffered due to unprofessional conduct." That's when I realized she wasn't after compliance. She was after destruction. From that moment, I documented everything, every fake letter, every photo, every drive-by. My kitchen table turned into a war room. Soon I learned from my neighbor Jack Nolan that I wasn't the first target. Linda had harassed him too with fake surveys and threats. She was tightening her grip on everyone, and I had just become her newest obsession. The battle for Meadow Ridge had officially begun. A week after Linda's fake violation blitz, the harassment took a darker turn. One morning, I woke up to find another bright yellow paper stuck to my door, a professional survey notice. Apparently, my property lines were in dispute, and a man named Rick Parker, Linda's brother-in-law, would arrive to reassess the boundaries. By noon, a rusty pickup truck pulled up, and out came Rick with equipment that looked more like something from a high school science fair than a licensed surveyor's kit. He waved around a level, scribbled on a clipboard, and declared with confidence that my shed sat 15 feet into HOA territory. Then with a smirk, he said, "That'll be $800, cash or check." I asked for his state license number, and the color drained from his face. Without a word, he packed up and sped off, mumbling about calibration. That's when I knew Linda's tactics weren't just intimidation. They were outright fraud. I gathered every fake notice, every document, every video of her drive-bys, turning my dining table into a legal war zone. But a few days later, Rick returned, this time in a hard hat with a team and expensive-looking gear. They planted orange flags, shouted technical-sounding jargon, and pretended to conduct an official survey. 3 hours later, he handed me a thick folder filled with charts, measurements, and fake credentials, claiming the county had made decades of mapping errors and that my driveway now encroached on HOA property. The nerve of it almost made me laugh. Linda showed up the next morning, her perfume announcing her before she even reached the door. "Now that your property boundaries are properly redefined," she said, "you'll need to relocate your shed within 30 days or face legal action." Her voice dripped with false politeness. I stayed calm and began verifying everything. Real surveyors told me a legitimate boundary review takes days, involves historical data, satellite calibration, and insured professionals. Rick's survey had none of that. The final proof came from the state licensing board. Rick's license had been suspended 2 years earlier for falsifying boundary reports during a divorce case. That was my green light to go nuclear. I hired Jennifer Ward, a top-tier licensed surveyor with a reputation for exposing fraud. Her team worked for 2 full days, scanning, measuring, and confirming the truth. My boundaries were exactly as county maps showed. Rick's report was a complete fabrication, but Jennifer found something even more explosive. The HOA's fancy stone entrance sign encroached 15 feet onto county land, illegally. When Linda stormed over to confront Jennifer, the surveyor calmly said, "Ma'am, this document wouldn't hold up in traffic court." Linda's face turned the color of bad wine. That evening, my neighbor Jack showed up with beer and news. "Emergency HOA meeting tomorrow. You're officially labeled a community threat." The irony made me laugh. Linda had broken the law to steal land while accusing me of violating community harmony. But what she didn't realize was that every fake document, every forged survey, was building the noose around her own neck. Still, Linda wasn't done. A few days later, I heard engines outside. 3 utility trucks were parked right on my lawn, tearing up dirt. When I confronted the foreman, he said there'd been a report about unauthorized irrigation modifications, threatening the main water line. It was another one of Linda's fake complaints. They worked for hours, found nothing wrong, and confirmed everything was perfectly legal. I was furious, but it didn't end there. The next week, fire trucks, police, and hazmat teams descended on the street at dawn after a gas leak report. My neighbors stood outside in robes and slippers, confused and frightened. 2 hours later, the officials announced there was no leak, just another false report. The bill for emergency response? $340. Filing fake emergency reports is a felony in most states, and Linda had just crossed that line. Within days, she'd filed more fake complaints, environmental contamination, water pollution, even claims that my garden was toxic. Each new lie was more ridiculous than the last. I called in a real environmental scientist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who ran professional soil and water tests. Her verdict was crystal clear. Your garden's safer than most public parks. It was undeniable proof that Linda's campaign wasn't about community. It was about destruction. Every false claim, every fake inspection, every bogus letter was stacking up into a mountain of evidence that would soon bury her. What she didn't realize was that her empire of lies had finally started to crumble, and I was done playing defense. When Dr. Kim's report confirmed every one of Linda's accusations was fake, I knew it was time to hit back harder. My neighbor Jack suggested I check the HOA's own permit history. "If she's this desperate," he said, "there's probably something rotten behind the scenes." So the next morning I drove to the county clerk's office, the air thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee, and requested every building permit filed by Willowbrook Meadows HOA in the last 5 years. What I got wasn't a folder, it was an entire box. As I flipped through those dusty files, the truth began to crack open like a bad circuit. Their so-called community center, the gleaming building Linda used for her power meetings, had been built without proper drainage permits, without state approval, and with falsified cost statements. According to official records, construction cost over $340,000, but residents had only been billed $1,500 each, barely a third of the real cost. That meant someone was covering up over $240,000 in missing money. When I called Jack and told him, his voice dropped. "She told us she got contractor discounts," he said, stunned. But the worst discovery came when I found a court document buried in the records. A lawsuit from the city against the HOA for blocking a traffic light project. They'd lost and were ordered to pay nearly $850,000 in damages and legal fees. Suddenly, everything made sense. Linda's harassment wasn't about aesthetics or community harmony. It was about money. She was drowning in debt and trying to expand the HOA's boundaries to collect new dues, using intimidation and forged documents to force outsiders like me into joining. She was exploiting her neighbors, keeping 67 families in the dark, while their dues secretly paid off her legal disasters. I stayed up all night connecting the dots, surrounded by stacks of evidence and half-empty coffee mugs. The more I uncovered, the more I realized she'd built her kingdom on lies. The next morning, I took my files to Marcus Webb, a seasoned attorney who specialized in corruption cases. His office smelled like polished wood and old victories. After reviewing the evidence, he looked at me and said, "Ethan, this isn't harassment anymore. It's felony fraud." He outlined the plan, document everything, build an airtight legal case, and expect Linda to retaliate with everything she had left. "Desperate people burn down the house before surrendering," he warned. So I got to work. My kitchen table became mission control again. Stacks of fake citations, fake surveys, false emergency reports, and security footage laid out like an investigation board. I even found allies. Frank Morris, a retired city councilman who confirmed hiding HOA debt was a criminal offense, and Sarah Kim, an investigative journalist eager to expose suburban corruption. She practically vibrated with excitement when she saw the evidence. "Fake authorities, financial fraud, elder abuse, this has it all," she said. But the most explosive detail came from Beverly Santos, a resident who'd quietly been watching Linda's actions for years. She uncovered Linda's personal mortgage records. She was 2 months behind on a $480,000 loan. The HOA was collapsing, and so was she. That night, I drafted a detailed report for the State Attorney General's HOA fraud unit, attaching every fake letter, survey, and permit I had. But Marcus pushed me to go further, to expose her publicly. According to state law, if 20% of homeowners demanded it, the HOA was legally required to hold a special financial disclosure meeting. That meant if I could gather 14 signatures, we could force her to face everyone she'd deceived. It wouldn't be easy. Many still trusted her. That's when Clara Green, Mrs. Green's daughter, stepped in to help. Her mother had kept years of records, and Clara agreed to share them with residents, reminding them how Linda had bullied her mother until her final days. Slowly, signatures began piling in. 3 weeks later, the annual HOA meeting was approaching, the perfect stage for a public reckoning. Meanwhile, Linda was getting suspicious. Jack reported seeing her pacing the streets, whispering with board members, snapping photos, and making calls from her car. The tension in the air felt electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. I had everything ready: evidence, allies, media coverage, and the law on my side. Linda Parker thought she was the storm, but she was about to learn that I'd become the lightning waiting to strike. 3 days before the annual HOA meeting, Linda discovered my plan, and that's when the real war began. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. One of my biggest clients, Jim Peterson, called sounding uneasy. "Ethan, some woman phoned saying you're under investigation and might not finish our project." I felt my blood run cold. Within hours, every corner of my professional life was under attack. Someone, obviously Linda, was spreading lies that I was a fraud, that my business was unsafe, even that I'd lost my license. Anonymous posts flooded local forums claiming I was a dangerous electrician who threatened neighbors and hosted shady late-night visitors. Every account traced back to devices registered at Linda's address and her HOA board's homes. The next day, I got a call from the state licensing board. The investigator listed a pile of false allegations, all filed by Linda Parker, representing concerned residents. My stomach twisted, but I stayed calm. I knew she'd overplayed her hand. That night, salvation came from Clara Green, who'd been combing through her late mother's old boxes. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaking with excitement, "Mom recorded everything." Turns out Mrs. Green had kept a small recorder during Linda's harassment visits. Those tapes captured Linda in her own voice, bragging about filing fake reports, impersonating officials, and planning to expand HOA territory by forcing property owners into compliance. When my lawyer Marcus Webb heard them, he grinned for the first time in weeks. She just confessed to half a dozen felonies on tape. 2 mornings later, Linda completely lost control. She screeched her white SUV into my driveway, blocking my truck, screaming, "You will obey HOA authority or we'll seize your house by force." Her hair was messy, eyes bloodshot, her voice shaking with hysteria. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains as I calmly pulled out my phone and hit record. "Linda, move your car," I said. "You're trespassing." She kept shouting until Mrs. Henderson across the street called 911. When Officer Rodriguez arrived, Linda was still yelling about property seizures. He explained, "Ma'am, you have zero legal authority here," before writing her up for threats and trespassing. That video would become the final piece of evidence that buried her. 5 days later, the annual HOA meeting felt like Judgment Day. The community center overflowed with homeowners, reporters, and tense silence. Linda entered in her usual suit and fake smile, but her hands trembled. She opened with a speech about protecting community harmony, and I stood up, holding a box of documents. "Before we talk about harmony," I said, "let's discuss the $847,000 debt you've been hiding." The room went dead quiet. I handed out copies of court judgments and foreclosure notices. People gasped. "Your HOA dues aren't improving your neighborhood," I continued. "They're paying for Linda's failed lawsuit." She tried shouting over me, but Channel 7's reporter Sarah Kim pressed forward. "Mrs. Parker, are these court documents authentic?" Linda snapped. "I don't have to answer to biased media." That's when I plugged in my laptop and played her own voice. Those secret recordings from Mrs. Green. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, outrage. Homeowners began shouting for her resignation. Linda's face turned crimson as she screamed, "You're all being manipulated. I'll seize your properties if I have to." The officer in the back calmly stepped forward, informing her she was under investigation for fraud and harassment. The board voted immediately unanimous removal of Linda Parker and her entire team. Within 6 weeks, justice came crashing down. The district attorney filed 6 felony charges: fraud, falsifying records, harassment, and elder abuse. Linda took a plea deal: 18 months probation, $50,000 restitution, and a lifetime ban from any HOA leadership. Her real estate license was revoked, her home sold, and the HOA restructured under new leadership. My neighbor Jack Nolan became president, bringing transparency and accountability. The community center was refinanced and saved, and the neighborhood began to heal. My reputation was fully restored. The state licensing board issued an official letter clearing my name, and my business doubled after the news coverage aired. Even better, the land Linda once tried to steal became a protected community park, a place where kids now play under the oak trees she once called non-compliant. Every spring, we hold Transparency Day, teaching homeowners how to recognize corruption and fight back. Now, when I stand on my porch with a cup of coffee and the smell of honeysuckle drifts through the air, I remember how close I came to losing it all, and how truth, persistence, and documentation turned the tide. If you're ever bullied by power-hungry people like Linda Parker, don't stay silent. Document everything, stand your ground, and never let fear win. Because no matter how powerful the villain seems, truth always outlasts lies. And if you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, make sure to hit that subscribe button, join our community, and stay tuned for more real-life tales where the good guys fight back and win.